Thank you for coming. I also thank our 4 distinguished speakers for the evening for joining us. This is a joint program of the South Asian Studies Council and the Yale University Art Gallery. And I would like to thank Kasturi Gupta and Tara Giangrande from the South Asian Studies Council, and my colleagues in the gallery, Moline Theodore, Liz Hartnett, and Ami Potter. Today we're going to look at 4 wonderful paintings, all of which are in the permanent collection of the Yale University Art Gallery. They were made on the Indian subcontinent from the 14th to the 17th century. They will delight your eyes, soothe your soul, and today we will tell you some really fascinating stories about all of those paintings. The good news is that they're on view and you can see them tonight. The bad news is that they will be taken off view next May. This is because Asian paintings are very light sensitive. We have conservation issues. So the Asian department changes its paintings every 6 months. The nice part about that, it's a lot of work for the curatorial team, but the nice part about that is there's always something new for you to see and enjoy. All of our speakers, as I mentioned, are extremely distinguished scholars, and I could spend the entire hour reading their resumes. Obviously, that doesn't make sense in a 1-hour program. So here's a quick introduction to the 4 speakers. They will then come up one after the other and give their presentations, at the end of which we will have a question and answer session. Please feel free to ask any question that occurs to you. These are distinguished scholars. They will have interesting answers, and we are all on a learning curve together. So all questions are good. So John Seyller, who is an emeritus professor at the University of Vermont, and with whom I spent my formative years at the MFA in Boston, has played a seminal role in the study and redefinition of Indian painting over the last 30 years. In particular, his work on inscriptions, on paintings, on flyleafs, and in archival sources have helped elucidate patronage, workshops, and even issues of quality and pricing. He is the author of numerous books, often focusing on the Mughal Empire or the art of the Deccan. Our second speaker, Dr. Dipti Khera, is an associate professor at NYU. She is one of the many people with us tonight who has ties to Yale, and she's been a fellow here. She works on the kingdom of Udaipur and was the co-curator of a recent exhibition at the National Museum of Asian Art. Some of you may still think of that as the Freer Slackler. She's also written monographs and other essays on lakes and palaces and lakes, and many, many issues pertaining to the 18th century on the subcontinent. Our third speaker, Dr. Emma Natalya Stein, is a Yale Ph.D. She is also the associate curator of South and South Asian art at the National Museum of Asian Art. She will be introducing us to the beloved Hindu god Krishna, who was the subject of one of her recent exhibitions in DC. She has also worked on the temple city of Kanchi. Our fourth speaker, Dr. Mrinalini Rajagopalan, who also has ties to Yale and is also interested in the life history of Indian temples, teaches at the University of Pittsburgh. Her upcoming she works on issues of built environment, colonialism, nationalism, and feminism. And one of her upcoming publications is on a fascinating figure called Begum Samru, a dowager who became the ruler of a small kingdom, was a patron of the arts, and apparently hung out with the Pope in the early 19th century, as well as one of the kings of France. So obviously a fascinating individual. Please join me in welcoming them. Again, they will all speak 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we will come up for a question and answer session. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to introduce a double-sided album page that I regard as the best South Asian painting at Yale. On one side is a portrait of the famous Mughal noble, Abdurrahim Khan Kanan, commander-in-chief of the Mughal armies. He was born to great privilege. His father, Bairam Khan, held the same title, Khan Kanan, and even served as regent from 1556 to 61, while the 14-year-old emperor, Akbar, was still too young to rule. Bairam Khan's murder in January 1561 inspired this Akbarnama scene when the 4-year-old Abdurrahim was presented to Emperor Akbar, who took charge of the boy. Abdurrahim went on to serve in various administrative and military capacities, among them tutor to Prince Salim, the future Jahangir, and governor of the wealthy province of Gujarat, before his important victory in 1583 earned him the title of Khan Kanan in 1584. He enjoyed many military successes, with his steady rise in status interrupted by several brief periods of bitter disfavor by Emperor Jahangir. Abdurrahim was personally talented. He was adept at multiple languages, including Portuguese, accomplished as a poet in Persian and Hindi, and famously quick-witted, and generous in his patronage of poets and calligraphers and his own atelier of painters. In July of 1607, Abdurrahim presented himself at court and had his formal rank raised to 5,000 men, the highest rank at court at the time. In September of 1608, he was given control of a province in the Deccan and received assorted gifts, including a robe of honor. One of these appearances at court probably led to the commissioning of this portrait in the Muslim or Hijri year of 1017, equal to April 1608-09, which is identified and dated by the Emperor Jahangir himself. This portrait, the earliest of several independent paintings of Abdurrahim, has been unknown until a few years ago. It's been here since '83. This standalone portrait, which uses the conventional format of a full-length figure seen in profile against the plain green ground, was originally more compact than it is now, as indicated by the placement of Jahangir's inscriptions along the former left edge. What's happening? Sorry? Why? Yes. Preview. And there's a slight change in the background color and an almost undetectable seam where the inner piece of paper was joined to the larger outer one, enclosing it on all four sides. So I made the slides here so you could see this is the original. Then they expanded it and added some stuff in the sky and on the ground. And then they set this painting into this folio later on. Gold streaks were added partly to obscure the enlargement, as were several marks around the ground line. Abdurrahim is shown as a short, mustachioed, 52-year-old man with a slightly aquiline nose and touches of gray at the temple and sideburns. Compare this likeness to two others in which he attends important court events, one from about 1614 on the left, the other about 1620, both by a different master. So here you can see where he is, and here on the right. He's clearly aging. Now he appears with a wizened physique and a thinning, fully gray beard. In two other independent portraits of Abdurrahim, one dated 1618-19, the other to 1626, we see Mughal artists recording the subject's further physical decline, though perhaps in a more moderate way. All three portraits of Abdurrahim are inscribed respectively by Emperors Jahangir and Shah Jahan. Few Mughal luminaries merited the emperor's personal attention in this way. Though Jahangir proclaimed himself to be a great connoisseur of painting, and he was, it was not his concern to mention in the inscription who painted this extraordinary portrait. No matter, because there are enough signed and ascribed Mughal works of this period that we can attribute this portrait to Govardhan, the preeminent Mughal artist working at this time, from 1596 to 1645. We even know what Govardhan himself looked like, for this inscribed portrait is included among those of contemporary masters at work on the border of one album page. It's down here, and you can see this detail is about the size of your thumb. Govardhan, who's best known for his images of otherworldly aesthetics, brings similar sensitivity even to the formal portrait of an impassive noble. His focused eye and of the figure, Abdurrahim, is rendered softly. The shading applied to the planes of the face along the chin and jaw is executed with great nuance. And the strands of graying hair above the ear, within the sideburn, and at the wispy end of the mustache are palpably thick. All these features, together with an emphasis on subtly rounded volume rather than on flat, crisply outlined shapes, which is the approach favored by most Mughal painters, are seen as early as in Govardhan's 1596 portrait of Akbar's chronicler, Abul Fazl, and an Akbarnama illustration, and continues through the 1630s. So even at his beginning, he's painting like this. A benchmark work of the early phase of the artist's career is the princely figure signed by Govardhan and dated 1609-10 in the lower border of a folio from the Jahangir album. This detail that you see in the center is small, the size of the fingernail of your pinky. Blows up well, you can still see what a master he is, really. The same fleshy human quality is equally pronounced in a row of nobles in a contemporary audience scene attributed to him. So who creates an impression of introspective, psychologically accessible individuals even in a highly formal situation. They're not supposed to have expressions, but they do nonetheless. Runaway. There we go. Now, the remainder of the Yale portrait is less developed, but the absence of sharp and dark contour lines along the figure's clothing and the exceptional subtlety of the nearly sheer jama distinguish this part of the painting from a contemporary work by Nanha, who's an accomplished painter in his own right. I compare this part here to something like this, and also the pants and the shoes even, like this, and as well as the hands. They're much less exaggerated on the right, and the portions, the gold portions of the patka, are much less conspicuously ornate. Now to the album page beyond the core portrait. Early Mughal border designs on select manuscripts featured Persian-inspired vignettes of birds flying about and animals chasing each other. They are invariably rendered in several shades of gold. By 1595, some small-scale human figures, such as the horsemen and the hunters on the left, were incorporated into these ancillary scenes, and were rendered in light red and gold. They were signed or ascribed very rarely, just about 10 maybe. By the 1640s, border figures had become larger and more elaborate in conception. They were now fully colored and habitually stood alone or interacted in pairs. These poses and groupings were determined by the space allotted to them in the margin of the album page. So of course I mean these two examples here. Other scholars have described the scenes in the upper and lower borders of this album page as the inventory or gifting of daggers, sometimes conjuring up a connection between this imagery and Abdurrahim's biography. I focused instead on the style of the marginal paintings and tried to identify the artist beyond them. This task is complicated by the nearly total absence of documentation for the artist charged with decorating the margins in such albums. One name that has survived in the 1640s is that of Muhammad Dawla. Another painting from this album has in the lower right margin a figure holding a book inscribed here, God is Great, work of Muhammad Dawla, son of Bulaki. Bulaki was a mid-range Mughal artist and was himself the son of a minor Mughal painter. These comparisons from the top margin and here a comparative detail give us good reason to conclude that the marginal figures in this example were done by Muhammad Dawla, a third-generation Mughal painter who did at least one independent portrait in the album as well. No discussion of this album page would be complete without mention of its reverse, which features a fine specimen of writing by Mir Ali, an early 16th century calligrapher from Herat in modern-day Afghanistan, who was praised for his mastery of an elegant script called Nastaliq, and one whose work was avidly collected by the Mughals and put into their albums. When the album was compiled in the 1640s, an illuminator enhanced the calligraphy by cutting out the segments and setting them on the diagonal, adding a gold ground embellished with tiny flowers around the words, and inserting abstract illuminations in the remaining spaces. The borders are decorated with blossoms that sprout from a thin looping vine, an open design that complements the delicate forms and the rhythm of the calligraphy. In this album page, then, we see three different works: calligraphy, portrait painting, and decorative borders, created, gathered, and pieced together over a period of 150 years. I hope that you agree with me that the result of this inspired and painstaking collaboration is so exquisite in every detail that even viewers new to this art must marvel at its beauty and sophistication. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? So a big thank you to everyone at Yale University Art Gallery and the South Asian Studies Council for this invitation. Most of all, thank you for bringing the painting on your screen out of storage, for taking care of it. Thanks to Ami Potter and Denise Leidy and all of your other staff in collections management, and for its conservation, a big thank you to Emma Hartman. Yale University Art Gallery acquired this painting in 2023. We have the provenance on the website with various sellers, owners from 1764 to 2022 listed that you see on the screen as well. I will discuss its provenance from the time this painting entered the care of the custodians at the Udaipur court. Nestled in the Aravalli Mountains, Udaipur was established in 1553 as the new capital of the early modern Mewar court, replacing the previous fort capital of Chittor. The city's founder, Maharana Uday Singh II, chose its location in the Girva plain for both security and sustainability. Although the semi-arid region was dependent on an unpredictable monsoon, its mountains discouraged invasions, and its watershed and natural depressions allowed for extensive water harvesting. By the early 1700s, painters focused their creative energies on visualizing the sensorial, embodied, and environmental experience of the city and its palaces, lakes, and hillsides in large works that extol the Mewar state's prosperity and pleasures, while also featuring the new political communities that were being held together. Painters offered a new subject and a new scale for painting in South Asia. They offered the subject of the bhav, that is, the mood, feel, and emotion of a place and time. With an average size of approximately 3 by 4 feet and painted on paper or cloth, these were sumptuously colored works. Scribes on their backs firmly offered bhav as their subject, connected to discourses in aesthetics and poetry, in pithy and long inscriptions, as you see on the screen. And these kinds of inscriptions also offer us ways to understand the sociability and power that was shaped by such artworks. Painters in the 1760s, like our artist Siva, whose work is on display in the Yale University Art Gallery, extend this established genre. The inscription on the verso of the painting notes the artist Siva painted this work. Siva, the son of the artist Naga, came from a family of painters. He excelled in small portraits. He also worked together with many artists in depicting large hunts, horsemanship of kings, and intimate gatherings. Our court scribe writes that the painting was deposited into the court store, that is the Ori, in the spring months of Samvat 1820, which roughly translates to the year 1764. The inscription in the corner gives us various cataloging notations which have been inscribed over the years, including numbers from a well-known inventory that was made in 1890. And we know when this painting was made, it was priced at 20 rupees. Most inscriptions on the verso of these kinds of Udaipur paintings include longer texts that always name the king, the Maharana, often specify the location and date of the event, the artist, and the date on which the painting was presented to the king, or when it entered the royal storeroom, which was evocatively called the Jotdan, the container of light. So now I'll show you some of the inscriptions behind these paintings that I'm bringing for you, which are all contemporaneous within a year or two of the work that you see in the Yale University Art Gallery. It's not unusual for inscriptions to identify courtiers by their name, rank, and physical location in the scene relative to the king, or to enumerate the sequential movements of key protagonists through space and their actions over hours. If we go to the inscription of our painting, we learn that Maharana Ari Singh ceremonially sat Birajya, that is, he held a formal gathering outside the Chitrashali, that is the picture hall, which is the 18th century space of the Badi Chitrashali. The small room that we have in the corner of this space is the one that where we know that there There were China tiles that were Chini tiles that were brought by the Portuguese, 18th century Dutch Delft tiles brought by the Dutch ambassadors' party, and other 19th century replacements as well. I'm showing you a photograph of this larger Badi Chitrashali, and in the corner on the right is where we would have this room. Here you can see it. This room was possibly referred to as the Choti or Bhitti or small Chitrashali in the Badi big picture hall in the 18th century. But we are not really sure of the use of the term Chini Chitrashali, right, at this particular time. In fact, a scribe cataloging a painting 1 year later in 1765, which is modeled on Siva's composition that you see in the galleries, gives us the name of this space. Thus, the current title of the Yale University Art Gallery painting, in my opinion, demands further thinking. What priorities in our looking make identifying the space as the Chinese picture gallery more valuable? Siva and Bhakta, these two painters who make these paintings within a year of each other, use linear perspective to represent the same courtyard. Both feature Ari Singh in formal assemblies. The latter is a nighttime sari. The king's portrayal coincides with the rising cultural trend of moonlight parties in mid-1760s Kishangarh and other Rajasthani court, whose poet King Savant Singh inspired Ari Singh's literary and connoisseurly pursuits. The painterly layers of muted gray and white, vivid in both works, give importance to the terraces, regionally known as Chandni, literally moonlight, which were considered the ideal setting for pleasant spring evenings. Similar gatherings likely generated the content of inscriptions when courtiers assembled around paintings. Entries in the daily records, the Hakikat Bahidas of the Mewar court, show that paintings were viewed collectively in the Chitrashali, in the picture hall, the kind of ornate palace interiors, in this case, adorned with murals that you see on your screen. An entry, for example, dated to November 1780, specifies that it was only after the paintings were ceremonially presented to the king that a scribe was called into the room to produce the inscriptions. Their collectively generated recall and identification of places, events, and individuals speak to the role that paintings played in stirring emotional responses and engendering shared emotions. For regional elites, merchants, religious leaders, as well as mobile groups like mendicants, bards, scribes, and painters, all of them featured in these paintings, the grounds for loyalties, personal friendships, and representation had shifted after Mughal authority was largely restricted to its capital in Delhi in the early 1700s, and with the rising power of the Marathas. The Marathas, like the Rajputs, claimed roots in warrior clans, were looking to expand in the northwest, which continually brought Rajput kings and estate holders into new alliances. The balance of power was particularly tenuous in 1760s as Ari Singh sought to bond with his courtiers. The dark-skinned candle bearer in Ari Singh's assembly under stormy clouds is an attendant. We recognize him across paintings. He is witness to the mood that is set up for pleasure, piety, politicking, and connoisseurship. Painters across works insert him to hold up light to the mood makers, from recognizable Bhaktan performers and musicians whose expressive presence shows their power to hold sway over the bhav, the mood of the party. Siva also aligns the candle bearer with the gold that lights up and endows power on the painting's place, the Chitrashali and the portrait of the king at the helm. we can perceive the work of this kind of a painterly affect only when we consider how these works might have been held up at an angle by attendants or placed on a low-lying table. They were certainly not vertically hung up on a wall. Ari Singh composed poetry under the pen name Arsi, meaning mirror, styling himself as an innovative wordsmith who played with mirrors and multitudes, adding his poetic stamp and praising his own work as extending and illuminating, casting prakash on the original works written by his contemporary, connoisseur, competitor, his frenemy, Savant Singh. His painters staged this construction across works. Shambhu, for example, heightened the literary panegyric and political construction in depicting the king's portrait and his reflection in the mirror, surrounded by a smitten community of brothers, dear ones, those who are dear to his heart, and his sons. Siva, in the painting in the gallery, inserted shining mirrors on the lustrous surface of tiles, inviting memories of touch and texture, of shiny, smooth, exotic things and surroundings. Which brings me to these rumbling clouds lined with snaky lightning. This is not the monsoon of Udaipur transformed by lush hills, thriving agriculture, and flourishing lakes. Nor is this a season of romance with loved ones. The only women in the room are decorations in gold on doors, adding luster to the place. Both our painter and scribe offer cues. Only one figure shows his mouth open with shining white teeth. He reminds us of Shambhu's opening of the mouths of the singers and dancers, the mood makers of pleasure in another assembly. You can see them on the right, the singers. Here, our scribe is specific. This is Charan Panji, the bard, who recites none less than the Raso, likely the Prithviraj Raso, which was a martial tale that was revived in 16th century Mewar and seems to have been very useful for Ari Singh to rouse his warriors. Depicted in the lower row, but not named in inscriptions, gathered here are the handful of estate holders who were still loyal to Ari Singh. Within a few years, he sought mercenaries from further northwest in Sindh, and these are the figures depicted with their swords and shields. We have examples from the colonial period of around 1820s, 1830s, when the darbars always include a group of people who are meeting with the colonial agents, but always have their swords and shields ready. And this painting is extraordinary for this time period to be seeing this. The clouds here may be based on the emotions of war and martial strength that the bard is rousing with his poetic verses to steer this community towards a king at a time when he desperately needed them as much as the paintings, poetic mirrors, and performances to bond his community. These two works that may look very similar and be made only a year apart could raise very distinct work of emotions and paintings for the making of history and political power at this time. For a long time, art history clubbed them together through the colonial stories of political decline and voluptuous pleasure. Political decline in Ari Singh not having any kind of control over his estate holders, and as someone who was just emerged in hedonist pleasure. I have tried to take you beyond the question of kingly portraits to the warriors, the bards, and the candle bearers, and the very loud absence of the women performers in this assembly, the only assembly that I know from Ari Singh's time, which has a political community together where these women performers, the bhaktans, are absent, is a very interesting story too, but that will have to wait for another day. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much to Denise Leidy, Ami Potter, and Kasturi Gupta for inviting me to participate in this beautiful celebration of the Yale South Asian Studies Council and the Yale University Art Gallery's collections. I will share a painting of the Hindu god Krishna lifting Mount Govardhan from a Bhagavata Purana manuscript that was painted in Guler, the capital of a small kingdom in the modern state of Himachal Pradesh, in a region of northern India known as Pahari, which means hills or mountains, around the years 1760 to 1765. So if you haven't noticed, we're going in chronological order of the paintings that we selected. Let's look. It's raining. The man in the saffron turban slings an arm overhead for protection. So does the boy wearing thick bangles at the far right edge of the crowd, as he marvels at the streams of silvery droplets coming towards him. The cows have gathered in the foreground. They dash and bow, their gazes as human as those of their attendants. Although the participants talk and turn to look at the weather, the composition draws us to the blue-skinned, orange-clad youth at the center of the painting. Bejeweled with pearls and a peacock-feathered crown, he stands in a posture of great ease, one foot crossed loosely at the ankle. He pats a youthful cowherd on the head who lovingly strokes the long, fragrant garland made of white jasmine blossoms that encircles his body, and he effortlessly lifts a mountain overhead. Yes, a mountain. A Sanskrit text composed around 2,000 years ago tells us that on this momentous occasion, the young Hindu god Krishna lifted a sacred mountain called Govardhan to create a sheltered area, and that he did so as easily as, I quote, "a child holds a mushroom." Now, I've never seen my daughter hold up a mushroom like an umbrella, but it's a wonderful image, really, because mushrooms are weightless and grow stronger with rain. So here is Krishna having decided to lift the mountain and doing so with ease and grace. Directly over Krishna's head, a peacock traverses the rocky hillside, an image of romance, and its squawks and cries seem to conjure up the storm. The story of Krishna's life is set in Braj, a forested region in northern India. He was raised by foster parents in the village of Vrindavan, and he spent his childhood in a cow-herding community in the pastoral countryside. Baby Krishna was known for mischief and a love of dairy products, especially butter. And as he grew up, he cultivated an appreciation for things of beauty, especially the cowherd girls. Now, each year in Braj, the community held a festival for the Lord Indra, an ancient god responsible for rain. He's a bit like Zeus wielding a thunderbolt. For days on end, women cooked foods and prepared a great array of sweets for offerings. But when Krishna was 7 years old, as the story goes, he persuaded his village to cancel their annual Indra festival and instead honor the nearby mountain called Govardhan. Since this mountain was the place where the community grazed their cattle, foraged for food, and collected clean water, Krishna managed to convince everyone. He then transformed himself into the god of the mountain and mischievously ate all of Indra's offerings. As you can imagine, Indra was not happy. He was furious that his feast was canceled, and so this powerful god unleashed a torrential storm to flood the land, ruin the harvest, and drown the village. Here's Indra riding his white elephant surrounded by dark billowing clouds. Snake-like bolts of lightning crackle through the sky all around them. You can recognize Indra by the elephant and by the little eyes all over his body. When the rain started, Krishna called the people together. Bring your belongings and your cows. And he lifted up the mountain, holding it overhead like an umbrella to shelter everyone. When Krishna lifted Mount Govardhan, here balancing it on his pinky finger, the people recognized his awesome power. When Krishna continued to hold up the mountain for 7 days, Indra admitted defeat, withdrew the storm, and bowed before him. Besides getting away with having eaten loads of sweets, something else happens to Krishna during the course of this story. He grows up. He becomes a fully actualized deity with the strength to defeat Indra and protect his community. He also becomes recognized as a creature of beauty, and the Gopi girls begin to love him romantically instead of maternally. Look here at Krishna's eyes. Although he bends as if to look at the little boy beside his feet, his gaze is somewhat higher. Does he look at the man next to him, who happens to be his father, Nanda? Or does he look at the girl in the green top, who demurely bows her head? Or do his eyes pass her and meet the eyes of another? Unafraid and seemingly entranced, the orange-clad girl and Krishna lock gazes. She reaches down to gently stroke the brown cow. Perhaps she imagines her hand is the little boy's and the cow's soft skin is Krishna's garland. Further to the right, another green-bloused gopi pulls her shawl overhead and turns to look at the rain. The next chapter of Krishna's life brings a maelstrom of love. One night, Krishna replicates himself so that each gopi has Krishna as her partner, and the group whirls together in a circular dance called the Ras Leela. In this magnificent painting from the same series, also in the Yale University Art Gallery's collection, musicians accompany the dancers on both sides, and gods send a shower of golden blossoms as offerings from the clouds above. Many other episodes and many paintings chronicle Krishna's encounters with the gopis and his experiences with his greatest love, Radha. Krishna lifting Mount Govardhan is one of the most popular and widespread narratives in this prolific god's life. Although it originated in northern India, it has been depicted in a variety of media throughout a geographic expanse ranging from Guler in the foothills of the Himalayas to Mamallapuram in the South Indian state of Tamil Nadu, all the way to Cambodia. Around the year 600, so more than 1,000 years before the painting we've been looking at was made, the story was perfectly captured in what is today Cambodia, in the floodplains of the Mekong Delta, at a sacred mountain called Phnom Da. There, artists made a monumental sculpture of Krishna, monumental like more than life-size sculpture, out of sandstone, and they installed it in a cave temple about halfway up one of the peaks of the mountain. With his feet firmly planted on a pedestal on the cave's floor and his raised hand pressed against the ceiling, at Phnom Da, it looked like the god was actually lifting up the mountain. This very sculpture was the subject of an exhibition at the Cleveland Museum of Art and the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art in 2022. And now you know one reason why I love this painting. While a sculpture can be site-specific and integrated into a larger landscape, paintings have the ability to more fully flesh out longer narratives. In the Yale Folio, we experience the emotional tension between the characters, the interplay between planes of color, the twists and turns of the bodies, and the peacock whose shrieks are a harbinger of the rain. Although it's difficult to say with certainty who painted the series to which this folio belongs, scholar B.N. Goswami attributed similar paintings to the artist Fatu, the nephew of the great Pahari master Nansuk and son of his elder brother Manaku, who was also a great master painter. One challenge with attribution is that artists operated in workshop settings, so often several members contributed to the outcome of a single painting. Another challenge is that we know Fatu's name from pilgrimage records, not from signed paintings. But the style seems closest to that of Manaku's, so an attribution to Fatu, or to one of Fatu's brothers, or to one of Fatu's sons, is the closest we can securely accept at this juncture in time. In this painting, the artist has been careful to include details that infuse the composition with movement as well as meaning. The planes of color, delicate patterns, and disposition of figures in space compare well with other paintings from the Manaku Nansuk family, and the details reflect the artist's sensitive command of his medium. We're left with the sense that Krishna, all-powerful and growing increasingly sensuous, is holding up the mountain as effortlessly as a child might hold a mushroom after all. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? I would also like to thank Denise Leidy, Ami Potter, Liz Harnett, and everyone at the South Asian Council at Yale. And I also especially want to thank Professor John Seyller, who helped me with valuable information on this painting that I am going to be speaking about. So today, I am going to be offering a reading of this painting as an architectural historian, so not unlike the others who have gone before me. I'm coming from a slightly different camp. And I also want to do a feminist reading of this painting. So this painting was also like Emma's painting, was made in the Punjab Hills around the 19th century. And it is also a Pahari painting. So as Emma told us, it is Pahari meaning mountainous or hilly in Hindustani. Basoli and Guler were just a couple of the artistic centers of this vibrant region of sub-imperial courts. What is shown, however, is both geographically and temporally distant from the Pahari region. One reading of this painting is that it shows the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan, who reigned in the 17th century in his palace, possibly at his imperial capital in Delhi, surrounded by several women. So I want to, as I said, I want to focus on I want to read this as an architectural historian and through a feminist lens. So I want to focus on the architectural settings that are captured here and also the women in this painting. So this artist gives over almost a third of this painting to the massive palace wall and the river that flows below it. In a painting only slightly bigger than an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, this boundary wall asserts itself aggressively, reinforced via a vertical register of bastions marching along the bottom of the scene. The starkness of the wall contrasts sharply with the joyous details and vibrant life on the top 2/3 of the painting. It is almost as if the viewer has been given a privileged peek over the palace walls into its inner domains. In this brief presentation, I'm going to identify 4 spatial frames for this painting. I will start from the outer frame and move to the center of the painting. So I think this is my pointer. I'm not sure. Oops, sorry. Okay, so those are the 4 frames. 7 women occupy the courtyard, the outer courtyard of this palace. All are shown in the midst of some action. 2 of them you can see here playing a game of dice. Again, I'm not sure where this pointer is. Oops. Okay, top? Oh, okay, great, thank you. So 2 of them are playing a game of dice. 2 more are engrossed in dialogue over here. 1 is walking towards a fountain holding something. Another watches an exchange that's going on surreptitiously over here. A woman whom we cannot see passes something to a man on the other side of the courtyard. Perhaps this is a secret meeting or an amorous exchange between 2 lovers. We don't know. Moving to the other frame, an architectural element that looks over the courtyard is our connection to the next frame. So this one. This jharoka, a roofed balcony, is a recurrent architectural motif in the painting, appearing a total of 7 times. From her jharoka, this woman sanguinely watches the action below. Her posture, shown in profile and tightly framed by an opening, is mirrored by that of 3 other women in this frame. These women appear to be preternaturally composed, individuals lost in thought and attending to their own needs rather than those of others. In the central frame, the Emperor Shah Jahan sits, framed by the most ornate jharoka in the painting, shown at an exaggerated scale with royal attributes, a canopy and a fly whisk held over by an attendant, a halo that signals his quasi-divine status as he sits cross-legged on an elaborate takht or throne. In the Mughal world, jharokas were symbols of sovereign power, essential to imperial performances. These roofed balconies, scaled to accommodate and frame the torso of a single human, were where Mughal emperors presented themselves to their subjects on a daily basis. You can see some examples of this here with Jahangir presenting himself to his courtiers and his subjects from this very kind of tightly framed jharoka. This is an image of a Mughal court lady. Some have said that this could be Noor Jahan, and you get this kind of carpet and this balustrade and her hand sort of resting on this is again a sort of an evocation of that jharoka image and its kind of imperial connections. The central jharoka that Shah Jahan sits in encases another jharoka, this one occupied by a woman. Note the continuities between the surface decoration of her jharoka, so this motif over here, and that of the emperor's canopy and his takht. Their postures mirror one another. Shah Jahan holds up a sarpech, a turban ornament in his hand. She holds a picture of two lovers locked in an embrace. In Mughal India, the sarpech was a royal insignia bestowed by the emperor upon a favored prince as a sign of succession. Because the Mughals did not practice primogeniture, this made every prince and male royal kin eligible for the imperial throne. The passing of a sarpech was the subject of numerous Mughal paintings, such as this one, where the Mughal emperor hands a sarpech to his grandson. Women of imperial households, whether in the Mughal court or in the Pahari kingdom, played a large role in determining exactly who the recipient of that sarpech would be. Wives, consorts, and concubines advised the emperor and sometimes strategized without his knowledge about regnal succession. Mothers of potential heirs had much to gain from their sons receiving a sarpech and being recognized by the emperor as the rightful heir to the imperial throne. Might we understand this particular exchange of glances between the Mughal emperor, possibly Shah Jahan, and a woman who is shown within the jharoka as part of that dialogue of succession? Shah Jahan wonders who to bestow this precious sarpech upon. His consort, assured of her own regal status, engages him as an equal from her own jharoka. And is this picture of two lovers a reference to her intimate connection to the emperor? As his preferred consort, perhaps she will get to decide who that sarpech will go to. This queen, ensconced in her own jharoka, appears now as a political player in her own right. Zooming out, we might read the other women at jharokas as worthy rivals to that central female figure. They too appear to contemplate their own strategies of advancement as they wait in their jharokas. Are they minor wives, sisters, and aunts of the emperor? Each would have had stakes in this game of succession. And is this hand then really that of a shy lover? Or is this an agent of one of the royal women passing an urgent message to a prince in waiting somewhere? I return to the question of geographic and temporal distance that I opened with. As a collection of sub-imperial states that were constantly in flux, the question of succession must have been a paramount preoccupation of Pahari kings and queens. Might we read this painting as a commission of a Pahari queen? By referring back to her Mughal counterparts, she might be evoking a long tradition where palace women decided who would be the next king. She and the other women at jharokas are more than harem decor, servicing the dude at the center of it all. They are active political agents shaping the world around them. And finally, at the risk of ending on a cheeky note, I ask if the Yale University Art Gallery would consider renaming this painting. Let us take a cue from this unidentified 19th century artist and acknowledge these unnamed but powerfully framed women. Thank you.
Hi. So let's give our speakers another round of applause, please. They did a great job. And we've got about 10 minutes for questions and answers. As I said earlier, please feel free to ask them anything you want. They're up for it. And they worked hard, but they can take a little more pressure. So go ahead. Thank you. Does anybody have a question? And I think there are people with, yes, the gentleman. Can somebody bring him a microphone, please? Please raise your hand so they can see you. If not, I'll just call on people.
Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers for your great presentations. My name is Ankush. I'm a third-year student in the Ph.D. program in the History of Art department here. My question is to Emma Stein. Since you made the comparison of the Bhagavad Purana manuscript of Krishna lifting Govardhan with the famous great relief work at Mamallapuram, adjacent to the great relief is the sculptural relief of Krishna lifting Govardhan mountain right outside the temple. And you also have the figure of Krishna, the figure of Shiva right there on the great relief. In the moment of helping Arjuna in his moment of penance from Mahabharata. And the point I want to make is that when we see these two gods in the Mamallapuram relief, they are seen as protectors, also as allegorical figures for the patron king who would have commissioned those reliefs. And since you made the comparison with the Bhagavad Purana manuscript, I was wondering if the Guler painting itself could be read allegorically to the kings who would have been patrons of the manuscript in the Punjab Hills, more than literally a figure of Krishna as a protector of the villagers.
Thank you for that. So I find it really tempting to look at this one painting of Krishna lifting Mount Govardhan from the series and starting to extrapolate to like, oh, well, it's painted in the Pahari region, right? It's in the foothills of the Himalayas. There's mountains that you can see. There's hills. But I think doing so would be really extractive out of this larger series. I mean, there's hundreds of paintings, and they follow the text of the Bhagavata Purana really closely. So we're getting this sequential kind of build of the story of the life of Krishna, and this is just but one episode. It happens to be a really nice painting, and I encourage you all to go to the galleries and look at it. It's one of the better ones in the series, as we were talking about this morning. But I think there's something very different going on when you have these sculptural representations of the story that they are one-offs, right? They are encapsulated moments that make very powerful statements within the landscape. So the relief carving that Ankush is referring to in the South Indian seaside town of Mamallapuram, it dates back to the 7th century. So we're 1,000 years earlier, again, than anything that we were looking at tonight. And it's a relief that shows Krishna lifting Mount Govardhan that's carved into a kind of cliff face at the base where, again, Krishna has his arm up, and it really does look like he's lifting up the rest of the mountain. If you were able to step back far enough, which today with modern construction and later construction around it, you can't do that anymore. But when it was actually made, it really would have been site-specific and very intentionally connected with the landscape, with water that would have poured down the cliff face. So there really would have been this embodiment of the story in a way that I do think is quite different from a manuscript painting.
Does anyone else have a question? Yeah, there's somebody way in the back.
Hi, thank you to all four of you for such wonderful presentations. My name is Lav. I'm a fellow at the Institute of Sacred Music and a lecturer in anthropology. I have questions for each of you, actually, but I'll ask just two. It's really, really wonderful work. Professor Khera, thank you for sharing. I've followed your exhibition on the monsoon paintings. Really, really wonderful work. For this particular one, I'm curious about the figure of the dog, and I wonder if you'd like to talk a little bit about that. And to Professor Rajagopalan, I appreciate the provocation to think of the commissioners of this painting, depicted a time 300 years from before when the painting was actually made. But I'm curious if you have any other grounds for arguing why, I'm assuming this is, Kangra region, Sikh Empire, and so on. Why would they hearken back to a Mughal system where there is no primogeniture, but in these systems there are? So are there some other bases to make this otherwise, provocative claim? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that dog. I'm also very curious about him because he is very different from the other dogs that are painted at this time. They are in several paintings and paintings by the same artist itself, but they are the Saluki hound who's used for hunting. And we also have like a large painting of this hound, but this kind of a small pet dog who is at play in that space. I have seen it in a 1730s painting, that kind of a pet dog. So I'm still trying to figure that out. And I don't have the answer for you as of now, but I've been looking at them. I, in fact, went down that research hole because of the Saluki dog portraits. And that's because I think we assume that, okay, when this was painted, that it was a rumbling monsoon night. But this inscription actually does not give you the, that the moment that it was commemorating. It commemorates when the painting is deposited. And that is in the spring season, so it could be of the last monsoon. We have enough number of paintings that specify both of those temporalities. So I think if one is finding such precision in whose mouths are being opened, those bards that I talked about, those bards are there in the comparative painting, which is deposited a year later. The same bard is depicted in a portrait, and his name is also there. But his mouth is not opened there because he is not the one who is doing the work of creating that assembly. Those women performers are the ones who are doing the work of creating that. All this to say that I'm sure the dog could be someone who is present as his favorite, but it could also be something else, which I'll find at some point. And it's a conversation that we get to have later, but the women who are not present in all of these assemblies are the ones who are the queens and the rising power of the Bhaktans and some of their enslaved dasis are the ones who are actually doing a lot of the politicking at this time. And Ari Singh, the Maharana who is depicted, his mother in fact becomes the next queen because her son is still a minor. So there's that whole question of absence and presence.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I have a short answer to your question. I have a long answer to your question. I have absolutely no basis of saying that this is commissioned by a woman. But there's also absolutely no basis for us to assume that it was only male patrons of these paintings, right? So my provocation, and it was very meant to be polemic, so thank you for asking the question, was that we assume that the only power is the dude at the center of the painting, right? Or the dude who was at the center of the court. And I will just, again, this is sort of a non-specialist, and revealing myself as the depths of my non-specialness. But I will lead you, if you're interested in this, to Molly Aiken's work on painting in Rajput courts, where she has talked about the fact that, like, just because we're not able to identify women
as very specific women, or women are not portrayed individually. It's an error to think that women weren't actually patrons of the art. They were, commissioning very specific topics. And of course, she's talking about the Rajput courts, but I think that even in these other courts, that there are, and I think particularly in the sub-imperial courts, if this is a 19th century, if this is coming from 19th century Pahari painting, yes, there is primogeniture, but they're also modeling themselves on like so many sort of, other kinds of, imperial vectors, that I think that it is very possible that the power holders and the stakeholders in this are women. So, I think that in a painting where women are particularly, this artist has lavished a great deal of attention on women, I think that it's an opportunity for us to kind of rethink those biases and those assumptions that have kind of, underlaid many of the ways in which we think about this. So, yeah.
Thank you for the wonderful presentations. My name is Hawan Koo, and I'm from Seoul National University here visiting. And I thought I'd round out by asking a question to Dr. Seyller. The decorative borders are wonderful, and I was always curious about the rise of these borders. When earlier you don't have these borders, and then you get the floral borders, and now you get figures in it. And do they have any relationship with the paintings themselves, the paintings or the calligraphy themselves, or are they just merely decorative, or do they have a theme according to the albums? I just wanted to know more about that. Thank you.
It's a great mystery. We'll try to establish...
John, hold it up a little bit. Thank you.
Try to establish some connection between the borders and the figure. Mind you that this was done 30, 40 years after the figure was alive, so how much he was known for and things like this, and how much agency the artist had in choosing which kinds of things. There are people who have weapons, sometimes, mostly preparing them. There are holy men. There are lots and lots of courtiers. So I find the connection very tenuous at best in general. It's not absolutely no connection, but I would say 5% chance that it relates or something like that. And especially early in Jahangir's reign rather than Shah Jahan's reign.
Anybody else? Please. Charlotte?
Thank you so much for these wonderful presentations. I have to say I've followed several of your scholarship throughout the years, and it's just been such a visual feast to get to see you all together talking about these images that we all love so much. So thank you for being here. My question is simply one that maybe can expand our conversation a little bit about time, and especially because Professor Khera brought up temporality. And I was struck by the way that you each spoke about perspective and the different ways that the audience is being brought into the subjects. So I was wondering, particularly if maybe one or more of you could speak about the different comparisons between the way that time is being portrayed in the different examples you brought to the screen. Thank you.
John, do you want to start and we'll just walk down the line? Sit down the line? I don't know.
That's a hard question. Moguls are renowned for having a keener sense of time that is more relatable to Western sense of time, kind of not epic time, but practical, historical time. And I would say the time that you see where this guy ages visibly over years is reflective of that sense of time. In these other paintings, we see figures who never age. They're always the same. It's a timeless sense. They're just types of ages rather than individuals aging for the most part. So I would say that's the closest sense, but my example was just a frozen moment when he was 52. That's what he looked like.
Okay, I'll go next. So I think since I mostly work on images of gods, I'm always in this kind of divine time where nobody ever ages, right? But it's one of the most powerful things about South Asian art, I think, in general, is that whether it's an iconic sculpture or it's a painting, there's this incredible ability to represent an entire narrative in a single image. So even here, just in the painting of Krishna lifting Mount Govardhan, never mind the rest of the manuscript that unfolds, more and more stories, all of that time passes, right? From the preparations for the feast to Krishna convincing everybody to, worship the god of the mountain instead, to Indra getting angry and sending down the rain, to Krishna lifting up the mountain. Like, there's so much action, and there's so many days at the very least that are all packaged into this one painting where everything is focused on that central act where Krishna lifts the mountain. And then he holds it up for 7 days. So then we have everything that happens afterwards. So there's like a kind of compression in a sculpture of like Durga Mahishasura Mardini, Durga slaying the buffalo demon, for example. There's an entire action sequence that leads up to that, and then the continuation afterwards, and you get it all in one sculpture. So I think that's just a magnificent quality that Indian art has, is to depict so much time in one kind of snapshot.
Thank you for that question, and I can answer it many ways, but one thing at the, with the works that I'm looking at, they're making it very clear that they're about the hair, and now they're commemorating a particular time. At the same time, it's also now very clear that those inscriptions, as I've called it elsewhere, are indices of, in some ways, the conversations, the temporalities of the time when the inscription is written, perhaps at a time of reception of the paintings, response to paintings, or their storage, and so on and so forth. So there's that aspect of their temporality where one can think about them not just as describing the representation, but actually getting into that space of the presentation of that work, the work of that work. So there's that time. And then, I guess, taking into account that we know paintings were brought out at different times, they were seen at different times, sometimes we get evidence about that as well through other kinds of documents. So I find all of that very useful to consider what is the work of time that is depicted in them, where the kind of the texture of that time, the mood of that time is something that is invested in so much, and then to take these other moments as well into account, because in some ways what they're presenting is also a certain potential that it's not as if the community that is depicted is all together. The potential is really that by looking at this and spending time with it, that they will be brought together. And the last thing I'll say is that for my own self, I focused more earlier, just because of things I got interested in and thinking about Ari Singh and, depiction of pleasures. That is a theme that comes up over and over again. And then I arrived at all of this corpus about his painters engaging with poetic metaphors that he himself is writing about. So that was another aspect of him. But I had completely ignored these kind of martial emotions that he's trying to garner, which is coming out of a very different kind of archive and recounting of history. So these are the this is the only painting I've found where you have it mentioned that the raso is being performed. This is a huge thing. Prithviraj Raso is a hero from the 12th century, talked about in the Prithviraj Chauhan in the context of thinking about quote-unquote Muslim conquest. We have poetry that's written in Mewar in the 16th century about him. 17th century, Cynthia Talbot talks about that. Early 1700s, we have one painting where an Amar Singh painting is called as representing Prithviraj Raso. So there's this question of performance of the Raso at that time when political power is under duress. So now if the Raso is being performed in 1760s when he's really in dire straits, so then that's another thing to be seen into further. So a very specific answer to your question, which is good food for thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. A very capacious question, so I'll see if I can match the generosity of your question. So actually, Professor Seyller has done work on this painting and many other paintings, and his he said that yes, this could be a depiction of Shah Jahan, but it could also be a Mughal emperor who is sort of much closer to the 19th century. So there is a kind of a temporal elasticity, not knowing who this is actually depicting here, that it could be someone who is contemporary to the moment in which the painting is being depicted, or it could be someone from, or it could be an emperor from. But I think that to me, what's interesting, again, and this is the lens that I chose to bring to it and I deliberately brought to it, was this idea of how women are sort of portrayed in this kind of, this very sort of staged tableau of having a kind of a, women having a conversation, one woman having a, kind of a dialogue with the, and what it could kind of tell us about possibly of a kind of a narrative of a particular moment, or a kind of a particular sort of, a particular sort of political sort of moment that was important. So in terms of time, I think that there is a kind of both sort of a compression and a kind of an elastic sort of, that I think is interesting. And I think, I'm now just thinking through this because you asked the question, but I think it would have added another layer if I'd kind of also talked about that. But it's something to think about. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you all again for joining us. Please let me remind you that the paintings are on view. The gallery is open until 8 p.m. If you haven't found the Asian department yet, walk into the lobby, pass by the information desk, head towards an elevator, go to the second floor. We await you with great joy. And let's thank our speakers one more time. Great. Thank you all very much.